Do you want me to do a synopsis of that line? What did you?
The line about exfiltration.
Yes.
Exfiltrations are like abortions. You don't need one unless something's gone wrong. If you need one, don't try to do it yourself. We can give you a nice clean job.
He actually said that to a senior woman at State Department. And when he left the meeting, the idea of the bicycles and the tire pumps, it was all over. And they said, Tony, you come up with an idea. You didn't actually have an idea at that time, did you? You didn't know what you were going to do.
Figured there'd be one somewhere.
So Tony started shuttling back and forth to Ottawa. It became clear that no matter what they did, they were going to use Canadian passports. The Canadians had had a secret session of Parliament. This is part of the heroism of Canada. This is part of the small is beautiful and why they are such wonderful neighbors. Can you imagine the United States Congress having a special session and agreeing to give blank, real passports to anybody? Never happened. The Canadians offered up, how many? Six
Times two.
2 sets of 6 for these 6 hostages.
Yeah, we asked them for some for us too, and they said, no way.
Not for spies,
These
they
are
said.
for spies only. These are not for spies, yeah.
They told Tony he had to go make his own, which is exactly what he did. They weren't Canadian. Okay, so you had to come up with a plan, and I know you've said you were back and forth, and it was somewhere you were on a plane to Ottawa coming home, and it occurred to you, this idea of using Hollywood as a cover occurred to you. Before you go into it, I want to just say one thing. Tony, back then, had been chief of disguise at CIA, and he had deep connections here in LA. He knew a lot of people in the movie business, in special effects, in the magic industry, in makeup, in hair goods. He worked closely with many, many people out here. And one of them in the movie, played by John Goodman, represents Tony's, one of his best friends in his life. His name was John Chambers. So when you had the idea, when you thought of Hollywood, who's the first person you called?
Yeah, I picked up the phone as soon as I thought of the Canadian option. And John answered the phone and he said...
John Chambers.
Yeah, John Chambers. And we didn't break stride. We were already planning what to do.
You asked him how many people in a location scouting party?
And he said, yeah, 6 to 8. What would be their professions? And yeah, well, anybody could take them off. But getting on with it is the problem. When you have high-level attention to one of your ideas, you've got to spend a lot of time doing what I call what-if questions. What if this, what if that? And things slow down. That's why I went to Ottawa and sent the idea for the Hollywood connection back on operational cable.
Exhibiting a bit of brilliance. I don't know in your professions, in your work, if this is how you do it, but at CIA, we used to fire rockets at our headquarters. We called them rockets. You had to go halfway around the world, and if you had a plan or a great idea or something a little outrageous, you'd send it from afar. You'd send it to headquarters. You'd shoot it to headquarters. And sometimes by the time they got it, you were already doing it. This was a version of that. Tony coordinated this in Canada and sent the coordinated version back to headquarters and got in huge trouble for doing that. And then after they finished telling him what trouble he was in, they told him it was a fine piece of work and to get on with it. And that was kind of a wonderful way to move things forward. You have to understand that when he was putting this idea together, and the idea seemed as outrageous then as it does now, maybe more. First, he had to sell it at CIA to every level, to his operations people, to the DO, to the DCI. Then he had to sell it to the White House. He had to sell it to State Department. He had to sell it to the Canadian government. And he had to sell it to the Canadian embassy in Tehran, and Ambassador Taylor, who was there. So he had like 9 masters that he was trying to convince that he could get this thing off the ground. And I think, Tony, you've said so many times, you probably couldn't have done it without your friend John Chambers out in LA helping you with it. John Chambers was an Oscar-winning makeup artist. His Oscar, the first one ever done for makeup, was for Planet of the Apes. He was the one that did those wonderful faces. And a bunch of monsters in addition for other movies. So Milt, if we do the next clip, you'll get a look at John Chambers. And Tony says it's like John Goodman is channeling John Chambers, his friend.